$100 million for projects. It's a total of about 18 projects for citywide, and we're currently in the process of receiving public comments for some of those projects. It may be a good idea for those that are listening to join. The next meeting is December 1st. It's at 6 p.m. It's at the convention center. It's in person and as well as virtual. You could join by, there's a YouTube channel, City of San Antonio, and you can watch that live. It is at on the convention center. So anything you'd like to add, Suzanne, to that?
I think it's been a great process so far. This last, the way they have it set up is that there's 2 meetings that will have public input. And the first one was this past meeting that we had. We had some really good feedback from the public. And then this meeting coming up on December 1st. And then the following Saturday, the 4th, we will do a tour of whatever projects the committee chooses they want to tour. And then on the 15th is sort of the last meeting where the committee comes up with the recommendations moving forward to the city as to what they would make a decision about where they want to put their bond funds. But so far it's been a good process and we've had some great public input. So I would encourage those that want to come, please to do so that the committee can have all the information they need regarding the concerns of the public.
And thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for volunteering to be a part of that.
Neffy,
yes, sir.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how many projects are going to have incorporated green infrastructure that you were talking about at the meetings?
Thank you, Debbie, for asking that. I brought the wrong notebook. There are 18 projects. Of the 18 projects, I believe the majority, I want to say about 9. I'm going off the top of my head, but it's in your packet. The result of this, just for the group's sake, is we certainly have limited funding, but the discussion was where do we prioritize green infrastructure? And fortunately, our partners, the River Authority, did develop a water quality map, extremely useful for us to be able to prioritize those locations. So certainly all the drainage projects that fall within those sub-watersheds will have a green infrastructure component, and it happens to be the majority of them. There are a few that do not have it, but if scope allows it and there's opportunities, we'll certainly seek for those. But there is a good number of them. Yes, and by the way, I did fail to mention that Debbie is also on the committee. She represents one of the council districts. She's one of the selected, and she's always taking me to task on making sure that we're doing the right thing, which I appreciate. That is what I have for agenda item 6 on the chair report. Moving on to agenda item number 7, which is an update from the Region 12 subcommittees. We did have a couple of subcommittees meet, including the outreach and the technical committees. Let's first do the technical committee to see if what kind of report they had back. And Derek, I believe you got that one.
Yeah, I got this. So I have the privilege of Steve and Dave nominating the subcommittee officers. So after a vote, I'm the chair of the technical subcommittee, Debbie is the vice chair, and Steve is the secretary. So we've got that official business in order. And then we turn to a pretty extensive discussion led by our consultant team, talked through the 39 guiding principles in the legislation, and Troy had grouped them into themes that went out, and it's actually in the packet here as well. And then I won't get into all the details of the discussion, but Troy should have the recommendations that we're going to talk about today that the committee came up, or the subcommittee came up with for the different categories as they applied to the technical aspects. I don't know, Debbie or Dave, did you want to add anything else? I think we're going to hit it pretty heavily for the rest of the conversation.
No, that sounds good, especially when we go ahead and summarize our conclusions to bring back to this group.
So that's it, Mr. Chair.
And I understand that is the critical path for us, is making sure those goals and the items that you guys discussed will be. So yeah, we will be discussing that.
Yep.
Significantly. Moving on to the outreach committee. Was that you, Suzanne?
Yes, and really mine's the same. We went through the goals, and I'm sure as we go through the presentation here, we can talk a little bit more about the recommendations of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you too for the reports on that. Recognizing that our critical path is getting those goals approved, reviewed. I want to make sure and give the lion's share of the time to our consultant. So moving on to agenda item 8, discussion and appropriate action regarding the consultant's work and schedule. I'll turn the time over to Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kendall's going to pull up the PowerPoint that's in your packet in case anyone has trouble seeing it. We're just going to go through. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things, and then Troy's going to continue the conversation on the goal setting. So we're going to talk real quick about the schedule, give you a quick update on some of the outreach things that we're doing, and then give you a preview on task 4, and then discussion of the goals will be after that. So moving on. So a lot of people have asked about critical path of the schedule. So it's in your packet. This is the critical path of what will need to get done in order to meet that January 7th, 2022 deadline. So first thing we'll need to do is we need to get these goals, at least, something pretty solid for these goals. Everything doesn't have to be ironed out and buttoned up, but we need to have the goals in place, knowing that we can, if we need to come back and add something later, we can probably add a goal later, but we want to get those goals in place. Task 4B, I mentioned that I was going to give some homework, but I reached out, a couple of committee members reached out, and so we have a technical committee meeting coming up this week, and I'm going to make sure that I give that information out there, vet it before we get it all out, and so be prepared for something Friday or Monday, whatever comes out of the technical committee. We'll talk a lot about it's what we're going to have to approve next time. So and that is the methodology that we are going to use to select our projects, our FMEs, FMPs, FMSs. So we'll go into a lot more discussion next time on that. But I will give some homework again. Then as part of that, we're going to have to start getting the draft memo out for review. That's going to be the, we're going to have to start pulling that together. We have pulled some of that together, but as we get the goals, as we get some of these other things coming in, we'll have to get that going. And so we're proposing to provide a draft review to this committee on the 17th. And that way we can get comments back and make adjustments, do what we need to. And then we're proposing a meeting on the 4th or the 5th, somewhere in that time frame. And we can discuss that later today at the end about when we can set that meeting. But that'll give everyone time to make comments. And, we can always accept it with the modifications that you are suggesting. So just wanted to lay it out. This is the critical path. So you can see we'll be busy over Thanksgiving and Christmas, but who needs Christmas, right, Troy? So that's an update on the schedule. And I think the next thing I was going to just mention was the task 4 stuff. Again, it is going to be approving the methodology in which we select the the different projects that we have that are coming from the different entities and the different master plans that we have. And so that's how we'll set that up. And again, we'll come out with a lot more information, make sure that everyone's really prepared. Once you have that, the technical committee will be briefed this week, but once anyone else has a question, please call me, call Troy, whoever you can get, need to talk to, and we will guide you through what task 4 is. But we want your comments. We want you to be prepared to be able to approve that methodology and have everything comfortable for that. We're going to discuss it more with the technical committee again this week, and so we'll be able to hear their suggestions and make changes accordingly. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy to talk about the goal setting, and hopefully we can go through what we've heard your comments. Oh, a little bit on the outreach update. So we had originally talked about a November 30th meeting in St. Hedwig, and having a little trouble. We had a couple of venues picked out and having trouble finding a venue there. We're still waiting on, we think we have a spot picked out, but I think we're getting at a point now where we're less than 2 weeks away. So it's going to be one of those, we're probably going to have to push that one. So we're going to try to hold the December 9th meeting in Bandera. And so we'll be working on that meeting. But I think the November 30th, I think if we go ahead and try to push that now, I don't think we're going to get the, get what we needed as far as attendance wise, but we will have everything rolled out by then as far as the public comment map and all those features. So we can start taking comment, and our strategic communications group, along with Linda's group, will be helping trying to get the word out to the public, and so we can get people on board. And we're going to be looking at utilizing the cities, the counties, and Sarah's websites to get some of that social media campaign out. And so we'll be reaching out to y'all to help us get that out. And I think with that, now I will turn it over to you, Troy.
Ron, real quick, do you have a time for these meetings?
A time has not, well, the November 30th is canceled at this point. We talked about it this week. We're going to do that. The last we talked for December 9th, it's not set in stone, but the last number we talked about was 10 a.m. We're going to have a 10 a.m. public meeting, and then I'm going to try to back that up with an after lunch stakeholder meeting where we'll try to get the stakeholders in the Bandera, north of San Antonio, north of Bexar County, who don't want to drive into Bexar County for the stakeholder meeting, and we'll get that list out to them. So,
Thank you.
yes.
That's even harder to read on the screen than it was on the page. Sorry about that. We're going to skip that anyway, so let's go ahead and go to the next page and talk about the goal setting. So last meeting, full meeting, we had a long list of goals for everybody to kind of look at. We talked about how to get through those in detail and discuss them. So in the outreach committee meeting, we focused on category 1, education and outreach, and parts of category 2, flood warning and readiness, more so on how flood warning and readiness can be used for outreach to the public. So we talked extensively about what types of goals, and based on the recommendations of that committee and then additional follow-up recommendations from the technical committee, we ended up with these 3 potential goals for education and outreach. Now, I do want to say also that one of the big discussions that came out of both committees is that there was a series of goals that were in here that in all of the categories, there was a recommendation to put those into what's called a toolbox, or what we were affectionately calling a toolbox, that could be used as part of education and outreach, and potentially an outreach program that maybe the Texas Water Development Board would set up at the end of the regional flood planning process or somewhere in this process to help take the information that comes out of this regional flood planning process and get it into the hands of the floodplain managers across the region or across the state. So that's kind of the overall direction, the big picture guidance that we were thinking that it came out of the discussion for the regional flood planning group. So we have these 3 goals. We haven't identified necessarily the metrics on all of these or on any of them yet, but we did focus on these 3 areas. Do I need to read them, or are we good? Everybody's got
What's
them.
the distinction between the gray and the white?
There was no distinction. I left that in there because it helped to track if you were comparing it to the set we had
okay.
before. There is no other distinction. It was just the way it was colored,
Okay.
because I was
It's not a prioritizing or anything.
No,
Okay.
sorry about that confusion. It was not a prioritization. It was just matching what was already there. If anybody wanted to go back and look and see what stayed in and what came out,
Okay.
try to make it easier for everybody. But these 3 goals, we did not rank them. We just said this is the group of goals for this area that we felt like we wanted to discuss today, and get input from the full committee, and then decide which ones we believe we can track and we want to keep for the regional flood plan. We can keep all 3 of them. We can keep 1 of them, keep 2 of them. We can rewrite them. And again, they're not set in stone. We're trying to get to, is this pretty much the general direction that we want to go?
Yeah, and I think we had I think Suzanne, we had some good discussion and we tried to incorporate what we talked about in here, and we kind of limited those in those technical groups. We cut out a lot of them. If you can, if you notice from the last list, that we cut out a lot of those. So this list is very condensed. We've taken all the recommendations. I think I just did a quick count. There's 18 goals total right in here. And just, I know a lot of people are asking, well, how many should we have? And that's really up to everyone in this room on, you know, we don't want to we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to underdo it. We want to do what you think is right. And we've seen everything in different regions from
10,
probably 8 or 10 to
30.
30, 30 plus.
The one thing that's not clear to me is who does the tracking? Who's responsible for, once we determine what's in the TBDs, who's going to be responsible for seeing if this region makes these goals or tracks them between now and 2033?
Well, it's
I
really up
suspect
to,
that would be us
it is the committee, yes.
to make sure that,
And or.
I certainly agree with you, because I mean, we could write all kinds of goals here, and if we
Yeah.
don't have an owner,
That's right.
and if we don't have somebody that we're going to hold accountable, it's
And a
just,
reporting mechanism, because I mean, obviously Derek's right. It'll probably trickle down to the administrator, which would be the San Antonio River Authority. But, yes, I did. I could read your mind, Derek, you know, we're so in sync.
the Sunset Commission is here.
So,
Get you more work.
it's osmosis. But I think though that the thing that, I mean, it's okay right now. I mean, we're reading a goal, we're checking the box, but really if this is supposed to be as part of truly something that's going to be measured based on these goals and not just putting it in the report, we really will need to think about the reporting mechanisms that need to be put in place, because and how often this is going to be gathered, because obviously you don't want to wait till 2033 and try to gather the data. You're going to want to have something every year that you track and watch, so that see if you're on the trajectory to meet the goal that you've put forth. So, I mean, that may be just a parking lot issue that we may want to talk about at some other time, but I do think that we're going to have to figure that out. And then, or maybe one of the goals here is determine how we're going to track these goals and what the reporting mechanism is. And then how do we encourage entities to report? Because, you know, it's already been challenging for entities to report information that you need right now just for the planning process.
That is true.
So anyway.
Yes, you are exactly right. There will have to definitely be another discussion on the metrics for each of these goals going forward and how they are going to be tracked. And there already was a lot of discussion on that in the technical committee meeting, especially just because everybody's thinking that exact way. How do we track each one of these potential goals? And some of them, I think that played into the reason why they were struck from the potential set of goals that we have left.
Largely that could determine which of these goals should go forward, is if they are actually legitimately easy to track or gather the data. I mean, I think that, you know, the public outreach, for example, you know, the number of public service announcements and emails and such, I mean, that's going to be tough. I get it, but I mean, someone's going to have to, are you going to ask the city of Bernie, could you please track the emails that you've sent out relative to notifications of, you know, anything to do with flooding in Bernie? Are they going to do that? I'm just using them as an example.
No, I understand.
So
That's a great question.
yeah, so that's why I'm just trying to get a sense of, should we make sure that the things that we can track are things that are meaningful, but also trackable.
I think that's really important.
And Troy, I would imagine that as we move forward, I mean, we've made a pretty good effort and had a lot of discussion over a couple hours on these goals and metrics that we chose. I'm assuming that moving forward, there's going to be some dynamics associated with these goals. Like this goal is not working. We need to focus a little bit better on this.
Especially on some of the more technical goals, I think there's still some information that we're trying to get pulled together to frame up those goals. You know, we did get the Fathom data week after last or whatever it was. And so, you know, some of that information that will tell us where the flood risk is, some of those specific things.
And let me ask this question it's probably a question that I should already know the answer to if I had read the voluminous amount of information that was available for me to read from the Texas Water Development Board. But as the 12 individual regions come up with goals that are independent to those regions and trackable things, but the Texas Water Development Board is tasked to come up with a statewide plan. Is a statewide plan going to be regionalized? So the 12 individual regions will have their own plan, and the amalgamation of those 12 is the statewide plan?
That's my understanding. That
Okay.
might be a question.
That's what they did with the water plan.
Yes.
It wasn't clear to me because we seem to be all working independently without a cohesive.
It all goes up
That's
to the state. They put a state water plan. I mean, that's what they do with the water planning. They take the 16 regions and then they come up with a state water plan.
And
But
I
they
get it
have a
because
good-
every region's got different needs too.
Right,
But
and they have, that's why they're trying to have a recipe here that is consistent with each region. They're all using the same task. They're all, there's some continuity and consistency to the process.
Down to the spreadsheet formats that we're given to
Right.
present the information so that all the tables match up so they can be combined.
And I would imagine if it's similar to what they did with the water plan, they will have a website that you will be able to click through and get the information for our region when they get that far. So you can look at it by region or the roll-up state plan. That's what they did with the water plan. So I'd assume they'll do something similar to the flood planning. I don't know if Anita's still on or not, but I would imagine that's the case.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to conclude your comment. I will jump in and say we haven't discussed the processes yet, but I do agree we will have something similar to water planning. And the whole reason that we structured it bottom up is so that we can look at the goals that each region is creating for themselves, so we could use that input when we do the state goals.
All right.
So in the spirit of trying to make it easier, I'm just wondering if that first one, instead of it being the number of public service announcements, maybe it's the number of entities within our region with formal public education and outreach programs directed toward, flood awareness, flood planning, something to that effect. So that all you're tracking are the number of entities within the region. And then you ask, do they have a formal program that's to educate people about these kinds of things? And we hope to increase that number over time, that every entity, every public entity or entity that's doing this does have some program for flood education and flood awareness. So it may start at maybe the municipalities and hopefully grow into something that includes all the smaller cities as well. Is that easier to track versus the number of
Yes.
announcements, emails, social media, et cetera?
Yes. Are you good with that?
That's a good change, yes.
I guess maybe, Troy, maybe one thing we can say is, anybody in person, anybody on joining us via the web, are there any of these that we need to, that we want to strike? Any of these that are low hanging fruit that we think? We don't have to have all three. We can keep all three, but if we go through and say, yeah, these are 3 good goals for this region, we need to keep them. Great, we're on board. But if there's any that anybody thinks, that's kind of a weak goal, or we don't need to worry about that one, just let us know as we go through these. So,
Troy, I have one comment on the last one about the
Okay.
number of public agency certified floodplain managers. And you can get that certification on the training program that Texas Water Development Board provides. So it's really basically about the permits that are required and meeting the requirements of those permits at this point. How would you track, or what would be another component, another module, the number of floodplain managers that are receiving additional training? I don't know how you would distinguish without having that extra level of expertise added to officially to their training program.
Right, specifically for the nature-based solutions and floodplain preservation.
Right, and how to maintain like what Neffy's having to do, natural floodplains and that sort of thing. That's not really covered at all in those, that certification program.
That is true. I don't know that there's any statewide certification in that area or national certification in that area. I think that was part of the discussion why we were hoping that there was some way to work with some of the partner agencies to get that kind of a module created or certification created.
Well, what's the process? I mean, is
Yeah,
there?
so I think kind of what the idea was is
Right.
we can track the number of floodplain administrators in Texas through
Right.
TFMA.
Right.
And we can see if we have more or less. And then it was going to be a process of talking to TFMA and saying, as part of your exam,
Right.
can you, because there's different parts of the exam, can we add this to the exam?
Yes.
Now, I guess part of what Troy and I wanted to ask the group today, is that a Region 12 task, or is that a task that, a statewide task? I don't know if Region 12 or is that our fight?
Yeah.
To go to reach out and have the not the water, TFMA's metrics, what they put forward, because that's something we really can't control.
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering too. Maybe I'm sure you're creating a parking lot issue of things that we're talking about, and maybe we would want to put forward as other recommendations. I know that again in the water planning process, and I'm sorry to keep using that as an example, but there's a total chapter that we have on recommendations. Either legislative recommendations or agency recommendations.
Right.
And it was chapter 8 because I remember it was very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So maybe we could, if there is a chapter like that, and I apologize if I'm not sure there is, but if there is, these are kind of some of those recommendations that we would want to highlight, like that we believe that the current certification process is not sufficient enough to include all of the options that are out there. We would recommend that this be something that's changed. And we don't necessarily track it as our goal, but we put it as a recommendation to whatever agency would do that. And I don't know who that
There
is,
is a
but-
chapter for that of policy recommendations.
So maybe
I
we
believe
could
it's 9.
note it there, because it seems to me that it's more of it's bigger than our region, but it's a parking
Right.
lot for the chapter of recommendations. And I'm sure there'll be others that will come up that we take it off of here, but put it there.
And then the state can track it.
Yeah, and
So do we
I
want to,
agree.
go ahead.
Yeah, I can tell you, you're going to get a lot of support from the Texas Floodplain Managers Association for that, because I've had that conversation with them in the past, and they do want to see, at least they had told me, they want to see a component to their certification about flood awareness and flood protection, because the certification is really based on the federal insurance program. So I think you're going to get a very sympathetic ear if we actually reached out to them and maybe gave them like Suzanne said, a recommendation, which will allow them to also spearhead it a little more. So I think it's something we really should get behind. I really believe that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make that recommendation. I think a couple of the officers at TFMA are actually leading a couple of the other regions, so they're probably getting similar recommendations from their other regions, but we'll definitely put that in there. So for tracking this one, is the number of public agency certified floodplain managers enough, as long as we are able to incorporate some kind of additional training on these broader issues and the floodplain management knowledge of nature-based solutions?
So yes, I see that without knowing what the current number of public agency certified floodplain managers, what that is, that increasing that would, and just having this in the specific goal statements, I think would be okay.
Okay. All right.
I agree.
So far we want to keep the first one and the last one under specific, or under category 1, at least for till we get to the vote.
So are we going to be able to combine number 1 and 2 and make it entities that are delivering these educational programs?
We can.
Yeah, that was going to be my recommendation.
Okay.
If we could combine the first two.
Mhm.
Okay.
You could include public education and public outreach and education activities to improve awareness of hazards, flood planning, and awareness of watershed and, watershed protection, nature-based solutions, something like that. Combine it if they have
Okay.
education in any of those areas. That'd be great.
So combine 1 and 2.
Yep.
And then keep 3, or is that a TFMA?
I like the idea of that in our region that we're actually tracking the number of certified floodplain managers.
I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, and if we can, I mean, we can reach out to TFMA, and it sounds like that's something that they're interested in. We may be able to just change that metric or how we're tracking it to include certification, an alternative or additional certification for nature-based solutions. So we can always do that in the next few months if we think that's a viable opportunity.
And then put the recommendation at the state level as a recommendation.
Yes,
Right.
definitely.
Yeah.
All right, that's category 1. Are we ready to move on?
Any other comments from
Yeah.
anybody
Anybody on?
online out there? Good.
All right.
Let's go.
Category 2, so flood warning and readiness. And this is, we had about, 5 or 6 goals in this category before. We trimmed it down to 3. So we've got supporting the development of a regionally coordinated warning and emergency response program. Now this really, this was a crossover between both of the committees. There was a lot of discussion on this. We all felt like this was a really, really important outcome or a really important goal to keep in there because of the potential measurement was that reduction in number of deaths and high water rescues. And we all agreed that that is a very large picture overarching goal for all of floodplain management. And so this is the one that we tied to that, directly tied to that to be able to reduce the number of deaths and high water rescues. It ties into that second one, which is really to increase the number of flood gauges in the region. We're thinking the number of gauges. We could have categories of gauges, but just probably the overall number is probably the easiest way to do it, to provide localized information to emergency responders.
Troy, I think on that one too, I was going to ask from our technical team back here, Aaron, that's something that's a pretty good need for you too, right? I mean, you'll raise your hand in support of that one. Just wanted to, I'm sure Neffy and Dave, that, more data out there.
The challenge is who pays for it. And that is the issue is so, because again, the overall USGS system, they've often cut back, and then you have to look at, public entities like the River Authority or GBRA or others that have taken over some of those gauges because the funding wasn't there. So I guess it's implied here that if you're increasing the number of gauges, that means you're increasing the funding. So again, another policy recommendation that needs to go with this is that we need to request additional funding from the state of Texas to support a gauge network. Otherwise, it's all going to fall on the local. I mean, at least if it's a match or something, if the federal government's not going to be able to keep up, we can obviously try to get more at the USGS level too. So federal and state support for a gauge network, because I'm sure the data is going to be very important to have the hazardous mitigation program that's being worked on by the state, the whole focus on having more of a statewide flood planning and implementation program. The gauges are going to be important. So again, for the chapter 8, the idea of putting in more funding for these programs would be important so that you could increase it.
Yeah.
I'd like to add, it's one thing to have a large network. I think in our county here in Bear, I think we have a pretty good network. We certainly can use a few more. It's another thing to store the data. It's one of the challenges that we've had, speaking from the city's perspective, in that we have received a lot of data and collect data, but sometimes we don't necessarily store all that data. So I'd like to see something in there that talks about the storage of the data also, because that, it's great to have the network, but when Aaron and folks at the River Authority need to do modeling, if I don't have the data that happened last year, it's not good for us. So it's not only a network, but also the storage of specifically some of the significant storm events. So something that talks about the storage of the data and access to the data is going to be real key, because it's great for a sensor to go off and tell you, hey, it's raining, but it's another thing for a month later to be able to say, yeah, how much rain did we get? How high did the water actually get? So being able to retrieve the data is also going to be real important in that.
So a recommendation for more of a statewide coordinated effort to collect and house gauge data and make it publicly available or freely available to.
It's in this, you have the development of a regional coordinated warning and emergency response program. Or you want, because that has to do with gauges related, right? Number one, you can't do number one without two.
They definitely help number one. You can do number one. I know y'all are, Derek mentioned last time. Go ahead.
Cameras, there's other methods than gauges, but it needs to be comprehensive.
Right. So you may be able to put out more cameras in places that you're not really trying to gauge the flow, but you're just looking at whether or not that crossing is underwater or not. And so that coordinated program, but strategically set up to look at the watersheds and the areas and the things that we want to be able to model in the future, is probably that bigger picture focus.
Of flood gauges and accessibility to data in the region, or something to that effect.
Okay.
Do you need to add the word storage?
Well, I think it's implied by
Accessibility.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, but I tend to want to include the word just storage and accessibility of data.
You know, I'm sorry, I walked away for a minute because I had a phone call, but you know, for storage and accessibility, that's one of the real advantages of using the USGS. I know it costs, you know, the O&M each year, but that data is going to be stored literally as long as we got a Department of Interior. So that is one real big advantage with using them versus the private sector, because the private sector, companies can come and companies can go. So that's one of the reasons why we tend to mostly use the GS, but maybe if the state could come up with something like that so it is stored, that would be comparable.
Yeah. There's the TNRIS that could be Texas National Resource Information System. There's also a new quasi-public agency called the Texas Disaster Information System that could house it also. So I think I agree. The best is to have it at a public agency somewhere that it's accessible to everyone and it's in an open format that's not proprietary.
I think eventually we may get into issues with compatibility, because I know even here in our county, a certain agency may have a certain protocol for collecting data. I know the River Authority has a different one. The city has a different one. We use Alert. Others use different but at the end of the day, no matter what that protocol is, there needs to be a storage. The USGS has their own system. TxDOT has they kind of have a different system. But at the end of the day, a place where we can store and retrieve is what I'm hoping we can include into the statement.
We will add it, or we have added it. So increase the number of flood gauges, rainfall, stream reservoir, or et cetera, in the region by X gauges to provide localized information to emergency responders and storage and accessibility of data to the public. Okay. Okay. All right. Good on those first two. So then the third one, increase the number of entities that use TV, radio, social media, and billboards to communicate real-time flood warnings, leverage mobile phone navigation apps to provide real-time rerouting for the public.
I had a question about that. Is it, knowing some of the larger communities, even within this county, we're currently using that. Is the thought process to look to maybe some of the smaller communities that may not have that? Is that kind of what the goal is?
Yes.
I had a question about that.
Yes, to extend it across the entire watershed or the entire basin for that, using that media. And then also that we talked extensively about the fact that when you leave your house in the morning, you don't know the crossing is flooded 2 miles down the road. But if you'd known that, before you turned to go left, you could have turned right and still made it safely to school or work. So getting that kind of information out to the public.
I'm curious to hear from maybe some of the committee members, Mr. Mock or Jeff. I don't know if Jeff Carroll's on the call. He is. Who's that? He is. I'm kind of curious if is that goal is that going to be tough for some of the smaller communities, even Derek, some of the downstream communities? Will that be a tough thing for them to do?
I think it depends on the community and the type of method used. Most everywhere has social media in some form or fashion, but when you get into TV, radio, they're not going to. So
Yes.
If there's flexibility in that regard, doable.
Yeah, so City of Bernia, we don't really use TV, radio. We use a lot of social media. And I know for real-time flood warnings, we use like a reverse 911 system that we have programmed in all the addresses, and we can start contacting people because we're the utility provider. So we can reach out to a lot of people. We have contact info.
Yeah,
Maybe it needs to be increase the number of entities that have a communication system direct to the public during emergencies, whatever that is, whether it's social media or they use TV or they use not reverse 911. They have some way to get that information out during a real-time information during a flood event to warn the public, just more general. Because like you have the system that y'all have or that Sarah manages, but
Yeah, I think every community is going to be a little bit different. Obviously in Bexar County and the city of San Antonio, we can offer a more robust system to the public than some of the smaller communities do. For instance, the halt site that Sarah maintains for the county with all of the high water detection system flashing units, people who live in the area of these low water crossings, or if they're on their routes to home or work, they sign up for specific alerts for those crossings. And so they'll get notified by text or email if that particular crossing is flooded. And then I can't tell you, every time a storm comes in, my AccuWeather app, blows up on my phone, and you see our social media on, Facebook, everything. So this is going to be kind of a hard one to track by metric like that, since everybody's doing something different.
well, I think it's more about just counting the number of entities that have something that they can communicate, whether it's social media or something that's more sophisticated during an actual event. However they do that to get information out during an event is what we're trying to get to.
and
I'm sorry.
no, I'm sorry. I'm because I can't see you guys directly. I don't know when I should open my mouth. And that goes back to what I think Neffy had said before about there's all these different ways we're collecting information. Like our gauges are all USGS, and we've got we're pretty heavily gauged right now because of where we are. And we have a lot of outreach programs where we're teaching people how to get those alerts through the gauge and how they can set a threshold of when it's an actionable level and they can be texted or emailed, like you all were saying. But everybody's got a different platform, and every platform has a slightly different way. So I think Suzanne's onto something. We probably just have to say how many entities do it, but we also need to make sure the entities are putting it out there to the public of how to access that information. You can access the gauges on my website. You can get the alerts. You can go to Infirm with USGS and FEMA, but if the people don't know to do it, it's not overly helpful. In places like Bernie and all, not reverse 911, and we do it a little bit out here in Bandera, but some of the rural areas, we have to have robust outreach to teach people how to do it.
So could we change it to increase the number of entities that communicate real-time flood warnings to the public?
That sounds good.
Nice and simple. Okay.
Real quick, I'm sorry to jump in. We've gone for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and we've covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. We still have 13 items to go. So let's try and pick this up, please.
All righty. So we'll move on, unless there's any other comments, we will move on with those 3 with the adjustments that were recommended. And so now we are on, sorry.
We liked having 2 in the first goal. It's not the second goal. We liked all 3 of these goals, thought all of them were important with the changes that were recommended. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so now we're on to category 3, which is the flood studies and analysis. This should go much quicker, right? So first one is increase the number of entities which utilize or adopt Atlas 14 revised rainfall data as part of revisions to design criteria and flood prevention regulations by X%. This is a region specific, so it's really just the number of entities that require the use of the Atlas 14 rainfall.
And I don't want to make too many comments about this, but again, we're looking at 2033 and 2053. So is it, I realize it took a long time to get Atlas 14, but should we say number of entities that require the use of Atlas 14 or the most current data? Or best available data, whatever technique you use, because by 2033,
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
there may be something else other than Atlas 14. That's a long time from now, 2033.
I agree with that. And just for the group's benefit, we spent probably when we, in the technical subcommittee, we spent the most amount of time probably on these next 2 on category 3 and category 4. But I agree with Suzanne, make it a little more forward looking.
Okay. Or best available data. Do we want to say from national? It's NOAA. It would be NOAA. Yeah. Okay. Best available data from NOAA. Okay. Make that change. Number of entities that require use of Atlas 14 rainfall. It's pretty easy to track. All of their information is now online. Yes, thank you. I will change the potential measurement to match, yes, or we will. Yes, thank you. All right. Next one is increase the number of entities that conduct detailed studies to update their local flood risk by X% or X number, or however we decide to do that. And so the potential measurement is just the number of entities that have detailed study of local flood risk. We had a lot of discussion on this, again, around the BLE information and the Fathom information that's out there. And then, of course, San Antonio River Authority has a lot of detailed information that they are continuing to update as a CTP partner with FEMA. So the question was, is this something that we want to track? Or is this, again, one of those guidance criteria that could fall under Chapter 3A, which is we would recommend you perform detailed studies as part of your analysis of flood risk in your area.
You mean that would fall into one of those those acronyms that you were giving earlier?
FMSs.
FMSs.
Right, it would be a strategy. That's correct.
FMSs, yes.
It would be a region-wide strategy.
I tend to think that I would probably prefer see it as a strategy
Okay,
on there than a measure.
we'll move that to a strategy.
I don't know. I guess I just don't see the harm in tracking. I can be both. It can be a toolbox where you encourage, but I think it's important to say how many are actually doing it, because then you're showing if you're making any progress.
I just tend to think of maybe some of the smaller communities that kind of depend on development to do their updates. And I'd hate to have a community that maybe doesn't have that much development, say, hey, well, this is something you can't do because development's not happening in there. But I guess the intended goal is for the city, the individual cities or agencies, River Authority, we actually go in there and do some of those studies.
Right. Or that is a program that is funded through state funds to make sure that the areas that don't have them are funded to do detailed studies.
And maybe I'm getting a little skewed because I'm looking at the next goal. And to me, I like that next goal.
Okay.
Decrease the average age of of the firm maps.
That was the one that actually we were on the cusp of striking simply because of Sarah being so progressive and having so much effort. The reason it stayed in is because of the coastal counties. The coastal counties do not have an updated map. Have dug into 13 different areas and cannot find any guidance on whether or not FEMA is directly going to update them, but it appears that they will be updating the coastal mapping within the next 5 to 7 years, maybe.
And the reason why I'm thinking that, I'm thinking of my community, city of San Antonio, where our maps are 12, 13 years old. And, you know, when are we going to do an update now? And I have a mixture of detail studies and zone A's that do have a study in there, but we haven't done all the bridge survey to get it back into a detailed, but I am trying to get there. But I'm looking at it as a holistic map scenario. I'm okay with either way though.
I'd recommend both if the group is good with that.
I think these are fairly easy to track, just given the tracking that Sarah does, and then of course the FEMA info is really easy to track. All right, and then the fourth one is to increase the number of entities which have completed an analysis for using existing natural flood mitigation features. I think this is a great goal. I just now thought, you know, really this could be pulled up into the third one pretty easily. So, excuse me, the second one.
Can you guys describe what that is?
So the natural floodplain mitigation features would include headwaters of tributaries, buffers, conservation easements, and additional natural features that would give resiliencies and prevent flooding. That they're actually all spelled out in the TAC.
Do we know of entities that have done that?
What now?
Do we have a number of how many entities have done that now, or?
Well, I think it would be the city of San Antonio, right?
And Bernie has
Bernie done that?
Yes. There's a few others that have in the basin.
Okay.
Bulverde has looked at it, a couple others. And then of course, Sarah's done the watershed master plans that kind of overlay all of that and have looked extensively at the ecological benefit of all this.
And then you can include the analysis in the mod flow.
Do you guys agree?
Sorry, did we agree? Do we want to combine?
Go on.
Do we want to combine 2 and 4, or keep it separate?
No, let's keep it separate.
All right.
The other idea, Neffy, is, you know, I can understand your hesitation saying, you know, we might have some reluctancy in some communities or not have that capacity in some communities. So that's another one where you could set your goals lower, you know. I think Debbie would be happy to see you add 1 in the next 10 years, right? And so, you know, I don't think you have to say every community in that. So just to add that in.
And it'll give the communities an opportunity to understand the potential and the performance that they play.
All right. On to category 4, unless anybody has any other comments. Anybody online? Any comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to floor. Flood prevention. Oh, sorry.
Can I comment? So
Yes, please.
this is engrossing, and I'm just a regular neighborhood person that has a flood problem in our neighborhood. And I went to that bond hearing the other day, and all these are great.
I'm sorry. If this is a public comment at the end of the meeting.
I'm sorry. I thought they were reaching out for public comment.
Yeah, no, at the end of the meeting, we'll have an opportunity for public comment.
Okay.
At this point, I'm sorry.
Kendall, did you get her name? Okay, great, great. All right, so category 4, flood prevention, we have 4 listed there. Increase the number of participating community rating system entities in the flood planning region by X amount. Everybody kind of felt that was a good one to keep in there. We also have increased the rating of participating entities within the community rating system in the flood planning region.
Having just gone through that difficult process, it's like ever been to got an overall exam check at the doctor. Having just gone through that, I would recommend if we combine items 1 and 2. Okay, I think would be appropriate.
We actually did talk about that.
Yeah,
I don't think we couldn't figure out a way to combine the two because we want to increase the number and then we want people to continue to improve. So we're not against that. I don't think anybody was against it. We just struggled with how to combine the two.
Because I think we viewed it as 2 separate types of activities. You're trying to just encourage participation, period, no matter what their rating might end up being. And then for, a more advanced entity like the city of San Antonio, you're looking for ways to increase it even more.
Right.
And they're really related and kind of easy to track individually.
They're very easy to track once everything is set up, but
and especially with the short term and long term. I mean, if someone could become a CRS community in the short term, but then they could improve over the long term. So kind of get credit for both.
True. Good point.
Remember, we can have long-term goals.
That's correct.
Or we can have short-term goals. So short-term goal, we could have increase the number of participating, or our long-term goal could be to increase the rating of participating entities, and our short-term goal could be increase the number of in the CRS.
Into CRS.
That's good. That's a good way to
Right,
combine
you
it.
can combine them that way. I think
Yep.
probably.
No, I think I agree.
If you want to combine them, I think that's the way to do it. Have a short term.
That's kind of what I was hoping because they do work that way. We're entering into the CRS. We should get a notification in the spring of what our rating is. And we already have a list of items that's going to get us to the next rating that we're already working on. So that's the reason I wanted to combine and make them one short and one long.
So we will combine those two. We'll make the number of
good.
participating communities the short-term goal and increasing the rating of participating entities the long-term goal for 2053. All right, we're down. That's good. We've reduced the number of goals. All right, increase the number of entities which regulate to the 1% annual chance future conditions floodplain as part of new development and redevelopment by X. And it's just simply the potential measurement is the number of entities that require use of future condition flood risk. This one was widely supported. It's already being done quite a bit, and we now have a lot of more. We're going to have a lot more future flood risk information very soon. All right, and then the last one in this category, there will probably be some discussion. Increase the number of entities that have adopted a watershed approach to flood risk reduction as a basis for comprehensive subdivision regulations. And the potential measurement is the number of entities that employ a holistic watershed-based approach.
Again, I need to ask, can you describe what you mean by that?
Where were you during this technical subcommittee meeting?
I wasn't invited, remember?
So I think that some of the activities that the city of San Antonio has done with the ultimate build out and that sort of thing, but looking at a watershed approach and being able to identify areas such as those that require mandate detention and those where areas that you're looking at the entire watershed and developing rules and regulations and criteria.
So I have a proposal.
Okay.
Based on that, I think it's a good description. I was just going to suggest, the last one from the previous section was increase the number of entities which have completed an analysis for using existing NFMF. Seems like that has to be part of the holistic approach anyway. Could we combine those two to say a holistic approach that includes the national flood mitigate and maybe the first part is the short term and then the second part is the long term?
It sounds like you can do it.
I'm just throwing out proposals. If everybody
That's
thinks
not a
it's a
bad
good
idea.
idea.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, the short and the long.
Okay. Do we want to keep it under flood prevention or do we want to keep it under category 3 flood studies and analysis?
It's probably relevant, Troy, because not really broken up that way in the table.
Oh, that's true.
So
Thank you.
we can,
Well, just for future presentation, or are we tracking it? Okay. You're right. It's one big table.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Anything else on category 4 flood prevention? Any other comments from the committee?
A real quick question,
Yes, sir.
in you guys' discussion, was there any discussion about the floodway? Just curious. Not specifically about floodways.
That's a great question, though.
Simply because, we've seen it a number of times, encroachment on the flood fringe, which is the basic FEMA standard. It really is captured in your item, increase the number of entities regulating to 100-year future. It really is captured in that, but I just wondered if there had been any discussion within that category about floodway. I have seen it in the challenges when you encroach in the flood fringe, you're reducing time and overbank storage, which really causes some issues. But I was just curious if there was any discussion.
not a ton of floodways outside of.
Okay, thanks.
Is that a chance to include the floodplain is a natural mitigation flood feature?
It kind of is, but that item really captures that. The item right here, the future conditions floodplain, really addresses it and takes that into account. I was just curious if you got to that through that discussion, but it doesn't sound like it. So
No,
fine.
but I think it's a really good point. Is there a way to incorporate it in that?
Say again more how you would want to incorporate it.
Well, I know that our stormwater code has this provision that you can actually build in the floodway. At least it did it one time. No mas? Okay, great. And so I think that Neffy's correct in that has posed problems in the past. Once you start implementing floodplain development restrictions, and then where do you draw the line?
Yeah,
Number of entities that don't allow development in the floodplain. That would be nice.
But that's why I'm saying that particular item, if the goal is to get entities to regulate to 100-year future, it will take care of that. It will address that issue by virtue of that. Now you're requiring them to build way outside the floodplain in the 100-year future conditions, or as I say,
I know, but I guess the question is, how many entities will regulate to that, but then give variances to allow for development in the floodplain? You can regulate to one standard and then.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of going away from this. But I understand, I get your point, and it makes sense. And this is kind of one of the challenges that I have with some of these goals, in that we are defining short-term and long-term. And for this exercise, this is critical. But I want to get into the discussion moving forward about quality. If we're doing this, how effective are we being in that? And that's going to be our task, to making sure that as we come back and review these goals, we start talking about, are we actually moving the needle? Are we making things better? And it may require some of these goals to be adjusted and modified as we begin talking about the quality of these matrices.
And I will say that the first page that we popped up there with the little tiny text, it does have an item for a proposed or a recommended strategy or floodplain regulation is to not allow floodway encroachment. So if y'all get to that, or we get to talk through it a little bit here in a minute, maybe we can circle back to that. All right. We're ready to move on to category 5, non-structural flood infrastructure projects. So we had a lot of discussion about this category 2. We ended up with just 2 goals, right? Yes. So increase the number of acres of publicly protected open space by X as part of land conservation and acquisitions to reduce future impacts of flooding. And potential measurement we ended up with was acreage of high ecological functioning preserved land in the region. Now, there was some feedback that the high ecological functioning preserved land was too subjective, I guess was the term.
Well, and I guess the question I would ask, I mean, yeah, of course, we would love to have highly functional land, but I mean, the idea here is that to preserve open space, if you can make a lift to it through restoration or through something like that, that's great. But I mean, is the question that you want the acres protected, even if they may not be, when protected, highly ecologically functioning? They could over time if there is a restoration. So I don't know what y'all were saying about it. It's more about having the open space protected. Then you could have a longer term, how much of that has been restored to highly functional and, provide.
Is this a situation where we set a short term to obtain that acreage, and then maybe the long term of increasing the lift or the
floodwater storing
the enhancement of it?
I mean,
Maybe
you want
that's
it- I
the
mean, you want
longer
it to
term.
be better. I mean, obviously, the better the soils are and the better the grasslands and all of that, the more functioning it is in the floodplain or in the watershed. But you have to have it first. Keep it from development first. I'm sorry.
And that's why I'm wondering if we could maybe set that goal as a part of this, but have it identify that as a short term, the acquisition of, or how many protection of it, and then the long term being the actual lift or making the environmental restoration of it, improving the habitat or ecological system or the flood conveyance.
And I guess, Neffy, my question would probably go to Debbie and Suzanne. Is a short-term 10-year goal of getting more acreage feasible? Like, when we look in the next 10 years, is, I mean, that's not a short-term goal. I mean,
If there's money.
So I just want to, I don't want to set us up to where, and we don't, again, we don't have to hinder ourselves by saying 1 million acres. We can say it by a percentage or something. So just wanted to put that out there that, if we do a short term and a long term, 10 years to acquire land, we need to temper our expectations, I think, with money and get acquisition involved.
You can still be acquiring. It's just that what you're trying to do in that second is you want to have more of the land that you protected to be ecologically, functioning at a higher level. Doesn't mean you need to stop acquiring.
Absolutely.
So you can continue to acquire. You're just trying to, have a lift. And again, some of this infrastructure money that's coming from the federal government, and if this continues, I mean, there's a lot of money in there for nature-based options, restoration, that kind of thing. So we just need to pull that money down here.
Okay, so the short-term goal is just to increase the number of acres. So to track that, it's just the number of acres of preserved land. And then the second long-term goal will be to increase the number of acres of, do we want to call it high ecological functioning preserved land? Do we want to say number of acres of land that are restored?
I like restored acres.
All right.
Question I was going to ask, I'm all for land protection no matter where it is, of course. I'm all for that. But as it relates to this flooding issue and watershed protection, I just want to make sure, do we want to focus that in ways that it's providing benefit to flooding? I mean, you want to make sure that it's, all land helps, don't get me wrong. So I'm not trying to suggest that any land is not good land. It is good land. I just want to make sure if any of that was talked about in your group about, is it, any land, and I don't know. It doesn't matter really. I was just curious.
I think one of the goals set out, or one of the items that we're looking at, is not only a project that provides conveyance and open space for it, but also something that's resilient. And I think that that's where it fits into the resilience piece.
Just curious if there was any conversation about that. I think that will come into the more detail-oriented parts of this as we
And
look at the strategy.
The strategy
Right.
discussions, right? How these goals get implemented or move the needle will be definitely.
Well, I think that just to add to that, that's a really good point, Suzanne, but to look at the entire watershed and where the strategic locations for doing land conservation so that you don't have to do all your projects in the floodplain. You can store it in the upper portions of the watershed. And of course, that helps with the water budget too.
I'm
All
just
right.
going to give a time check for me. I've got to leave at 5:30, and I think
Okay.
you have a quorum without my vote, but I just
Yep.
wanted you to know I'm leaving at
I
5:30.
think
You got-
we're going to push through it. today.
Yep,
We're gonna,
real quick.
You're gonna get it.
So the next one was widely supported, reduce the number of NFIP repetitive loss properties in the flood planning region. It's easy to track. It's just the number. So that one we keep. The last category is structural flood infrastructure projects. And there was 3 here left. Reduce the number of vulnerable critical facilities located within the existing and future 1% annual chance floodplain by X number percent, however it is decided. And that's just simply number of critical facilities located in the floodplain.
Yeah, those first two are probably a couple of the, that's what we're right now, what the exercise Troy and I are going through with the floodplains and looking at the vulnerability. That's like the heart, these are like the heart of what the state flood planning is looking at. So
My only question on that is why are we only tracking critical facilities and not homes?
Well, the homes is covered by the NFIP repetitive loss too. But we can add it. I mean, it's just the critical facilities is something that's specifically tracked within the floodplain.
Okay, but the reduce the number of NFIP repetitive loss properties. That's from the insurance perspective, right? So some of these homes don't have flood insurance.
Mhm.
They're still in the floodplain. Would we track them? So,
We certainly can. I mean,
because I mean, the whole idea is to try to get as many homes out of the floodplain.
I think the challenge is the floodplain may change over time. So
Well, how's that different with your critical facilities? The floodplain changes.
you're right. It could,
I mean, I can appreciate Suzanne's point on tracking homes, but I think you've got to call out, I would want to call out critical infrastructure separately.
So would you like to add, would the group like to add one that is to track?
Specifically for residential homes, or I do.
Residential properties,
Sure.
Residential
keep,
properties.
not just homes, that adds
Residential
everything.
properties. I like that.
Yeah.
Habitable structures. There you go, Troy. Reduce the number of habitable structures impacted by the 1%.
all right.
Good point, Suzanne.
Do we want to keep that under 6 or I'm going to put it under 5, I guess, just to keep it with the NFIP because if it gets lost, I'll put it next to it in the list, not under that category.
Yeah, you can track it structural or non-structural. Both of them have a
Yeah, no, you can.
So
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover, so it won't fall into that necessarily. It'll be in both. All right, reduce the number of vulnerable roadway segments and low water crossings located within the existing and future 1% annual chance floodplain by X. This originally was 2. We decided to combine it. We did not make the change to the potential measurement because it should say miles of roadway segments and low water crossings
Okay,
located.
that was going to be my comment.
Yep. So we'll make that one, keep that one. And then the last one is increase the number of structural projects that include a nature-based solution or green infrastructure component. And the potential measurement is the number of projects constructed with green infrastructure versus being purely green infrastructure projects. That was the change that we made on that one. Everybody good with that one? Any other comments on any of the goals by the committee? All right.
That's good. So I guess at this point, we need to get an actual motion to get these items approved.
Yes.
So let me just be clear that the motion needs to say that we are approving the goals
as amended.
as amended by the committee today.
Yes.
Because there has been some amendments and changes to the goals as today from what we received.
Yes.
Yes.
So I need a motion to approve the goals stated in task B as amended today by the committee.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, let's vote. All in favor of the goals on task B as amended today by the committee? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, item passes.
It is.
Now, just for, just checking, Suzanne, you need to step out. You have like 3 minutes. I do have another item that needs a vote. I think I may have enough here. Jeff is back. Okay, so Jeff, so the next item on the agenda is the negotiate and execute the RFP contract amendment. Kendall, can I give that to you? Thank you, thank you, Suzanne.
Yes, sir. All right, let's transition here. Okay. The state gave the Texas Water Development Board additional funding for tasks given to the Regional Flood Planning Group. So the action that I am asking the committee take today is to authorize the planning group sponsor to negotiate and execute an amendment to the Regional Flood Planning Grant contract with TWDB to incorporate additional funding for the first cycle regional flood planning, including necessary revisions to the contract scope of work and budget. That is the first, that is 9A. 9B is a similar motion, but it's requesting the authorization to negotiate, it's the subcontract with the technical consultant then. So we need to make one motion for the San Antonio River Authority to negotiate with TWDB, and the second motion similarly with HDR.
Okay, let's put the motion on the floor here. The first 9A, the motion is to authorize the planning group sponsor, the River Authority, to negotiate and execute an amendment with the Regional Flood Planning Grant contract with the Texas Water Development Board to incorporate additional funding for the first cycle regional flood planning. Do I have a motion? Do I have a,
Dave Wegman motions that.
I second.
who was that?
John Beasley.
John B. Second. Any discussion? Do we need to discuss the implementation, what this means? We all good with this? Hearing no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, item 9A passes. The next item related to that motion is to authorize the planning group sponsor, San Antonio River Authority, to negotiate and execute the amendment to the Regional Flood Planning Grant subcontractor, the HDR half team, with technical consultant to incorporate additional funding for the first cycle of the regional flood planning. That is the motion. Can I get
So moved, Dave Wegman.
can I get a second?
Debbie Reed seconds.
Deborah Reed seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, agenda number 9B passes. This time we'll move on to agenda item 10, presentation by planning group sponsor or current budget expenses to date. This was an item that I had specifically requested as a form of understanding where we are at with our budget in moving forward. So let me give the time over to Kendall.
Yes, sir, and I can keep it brief. At this time, we still have our full budget. The invoicings are all pending. We have yet to make a formal bill statement, so we still have our full budget to work with.
Please send us an invoice. Let's get going.
As you know, we signed everything was done in August. We got underway. We received our first sub invoices we've worked out invoicing internally with the River Authority. And so invoices we have them on the way, just none have hit the books yet. Takes a
Okay.
little time.
We'll ask this again as we move forward.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Kendall.
Next time.
Let's go on to item number 11. The regional liaison updates, recognizing that both our representative Suzanne and 2 of our 3 representatives are away. Suzanne, who had to step out, and Kara, who's on vacation. So we'll hand the time over to David. Mr. Mock.
Okay, basically, Region 13 has got a meeting 12/6 in Tilden. Also, they've been very busy with their committees, subcommittees and technical committees, and I actually asked one of my colleagues here that sits on that to give me their recommendations from their technical committee. So I'm going to go ahead, if it's okay with you, and share that. I guess I'll give it to Kendall and she can disseminate it out to everybody here. I'll be able to do that tomorrow if that's okay with you, Neffy. But that's for their next meeting. It's going to be in person down there, and I've got 2 representatives going to be at that meeting, so I'll be able to give you a good update from that.
Thank you, sir. We'll look forward to receiving that information. At this time, we'll move on to agenda number 12, public comments. Kendall, do we have?
At this time, I'd like to ask Mary Johnson if she would still like to give a public comment over GoToMeetings.
Yes, I would. This is engrossing and all this is so important. And I'm trying to wrap my head around all of it. I'm just a neighborhood leader. I live in the inner city. I guess what I want to know is, how does this all get implemented without really strong UDC language, not just here in San Antonio, but all over the state of Texas? Because what I see is there's a huge disconnect between these goals and what most DSD does in most cities, as far as, someone brought it up, the variances that are granted, neighborhoods know where the issues are within their neighborhood. We know where the flooding problems are. And so how do we get stronger UDC language that aren't just, best management practice or low income developments that are just suggestions? We need hard and fast rules. I mean, how do we do that?
Yes, this period is a time for comments. So you can finish the comments that you have, and then we can address that later.
Okay, well, that was my comment, is that I love all this and it's tax dollars going in the right direction, but it's like I get frustrated because I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. I mean, this is all a really good start. But they're absolutely very dangerous. This isn't just about outside the city limits. We have and after attending that bond committee hearing and seeing some of the footage and the film, that was just, 2 or 3 neighborhoods that showed up. And we have very serious flooding issues within our city that it looks like the city leaders aren't even aware of. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Maybe all of y'all know that, but every time I attend one of these meetings, I learn something new. And thank you for all the work and effort y'all put into all this. It's engrossing, and I appreciate the work y'all are doing.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Is there any other public comments?
No one else has signed up. No, sir.
Okay. Going on to item number 13, date and potential agenda for the next meeting. Kendall?
I would like to say we left our last meeting in October with a hold for December 7th. The set date at this time is December 21st, but given the holidays and the need to meet both in December and January, in order to get this technical memo delivered to TWDB, I encourage us to use December 7th as the next planning group meeting date. And that meeting can be held here at the San Antonio River Authority. And I encourage us to meet then instead of on the 21st.
You won't be here. What time are we proposing on the 7th of December? Do we have-
Morning or afternoon, whatever works best for the planning group.
I'd like to recommend December the 16th if that's not too late.
For the consultants, would December 16th be too late? Because I'm looking at your critical issue here and you have email to the draft on December 17th. If we have any comments or changes that would need to happen,
The December 17th meeting probably wouldn't affect that too.
it would not affect it? Okay. Dave, will you be available on the 17th? Derek, any concerns on the 17th? The 16th, I'm sorry.
Good on the 16th.
Jeff, Dave, Steve,
I'm good on the 16th.
I'm not hearing from Steve Gonzalez.
I'm here, man.
Sounds good. Jeff, any concerns on the 16th of December?
16th works for me.
I think I heard from. Okay, let's consider the 16th. What time?
10:30 time that we typically meet.
Can I request an afternoon meeting? City Council.
We can do a 2 o'clock meeting again? Does that
2
work?
o'clock meeting on the December 16th to be our next meeting. Any agenda items that we want to consider for that day? From the consultants, is there anything that we need to?
We will be discussing task 4A, 4B, and I will send out homework.
Okay.
Neffy, I'd like to bring up at the time we're bringing David Skoudas from the Mile High Flood District in Colorado to give a short presentation on cost benefit analysis. And I will be glad to share some video information and we could put it online or you'd send it out to the group. Kendall, would that be possible? So that you could see some of the information put together.
Absolutely.
Cost benefit analysis for what?
Cost benefit analysis in managing the floodplain between infrastructure and hybrid infrastructure and green infrastructure. So looking at each one of those. And David, I don't know, but I've worked with several public works directors where one of the goals was to assist private properties to reclaim their property to increase the tax base. And this gentleman has done a lot of analysis on what the city actually gained from that.
I don't have a concern with listening to a presentation. I just want to make sure that we have enough time to address our first deliverable. And so I'm looking to consultants if we will have enough time, because I know we have to discuss items that day.
Yeah, Debbie, I guess my suggestion would be is can we push that till either like the January or February meeting to give him some time? We'll still get it in front of the group. I think, we'll still have it well before the final plan is ever implemented.
This is for the January meeting. So we would bring it up at the December meeting, making sure everybody's okay with it.
Well, I was just saying if we could put that, if we're looking at putting it on the agenda, maybe in February, after all of
So
after
what
we
he's
get
saying
past
is
the memo.
we can bring it up, but the actual presentation be done in January timeframe so that we take advantage of the time that we have allotted to address the deliverable that we need.
Just to make sure you want him to present at the February meeting, not the January meeting. I'll check with him. I got dates for January, so.
Okay. That's okay.
Thank you.
And I think, Neffy, if we can also talk about the January meeting as well, setting that date.
Yes.
Setting the January meeting.
Right now?
Yes, right now
Okay.
I'm suggesting the 4th or the 5th, whatever works for the committee.
Okay.
As soon as you get back, well, we have to have the, you have to approve the draft, you have to approve the memo.
Right.
And so
That's correct. That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
we have to do that, and it's due on the 7th.
That's
So in
correct.
case there's any comments, I'd like
At least the data
to
address
the
it.
data.
David, Mr. Mock, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I got to apologize when I stepped away. Maybe this was talked about, but I think in the committee outreach meeting, we had set a date for having a meeting out in Bandera in December, and I'm going to ask Kendall about that. I thought we were going to have a meeting. If we are, I need to go ahead and start getting that posted and start working on it. Kendall, what was last meeting we had? Was that the 9th we were going to do one?
Hey, David, this is Ron with HDR. We are scheduled for the 9th, and our outreach committee, our outreach from myself, Linda Jimenez, and we'll be reaching out to you this week about getting that date set.
Okay, because we got to go ahead and start advertising that, or we're going to have not a real good showing. So
Okay,
if it's going to be the 9th, I've got 2 people dedicated to outreach and education. I can get them working on it. So let's do the 9th at 10 a.m. And we'll probably have it at my district, maybe the co-op, and I'll get to work on that now.
Yep. And just so you know, David, we're going to plan to have a public meeting from 10 to 12, something in that time frame, and then also looking at having a stakeholder meeting as well,
Okay.
maybe early afternoon. But we'll
Okay.
I actually have a meeting with the consulting group that's handling outreach tomorrow morning, and we'll reach out to you soon after.
Perfect, because that's going to creep up on us pretty quick.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate your help with that. The outreach meetings are so critical to us, to the success of this group. But getting back to, we need to talk about setting a meeting in January 4th. 4th or 5th, that's a Tuesday or a Wednesday in January. What works best for you guys?
The 4th is fine.
4th is good. Derek, what's your calendar looking like, Dave?
I'm good with either. The only caveat on the 4th is that I know the 3rd is a county holiday for New Year's holiday. If other entities are also having that, and some of you guys may be taking an extra day, I don't know, but I can do either one.
Steve Gonzalez, 3rd or 4th, what looks good for you?
I'd prefer the 4th.
Sorry,
I'd prefer the 4th.
4th.
I'm good either way, but 5th is probably better for what Dave said, just coming off of a holiday.
Forgot to ask Mr. Yanta. Mr. Yanta, what looks good for you, the 4th or the 5th?
I believe I can do either day.
Either day, okay. John Beasley, any, he's on the phone. Dave Mock, Mr. Mock?
Either day is good for me.
Either day, okay. Well, let's go for the 4th, if that's okay with everybody. It sounds like it is. Let's schedule it for the Tuesday, January 4th.
No.
January.
Oh, that's right.
January 4th.
So would you like a morning or afternoon meeting?
Afternoon.
Afternoon.
2 o'clock?
2 o'clock, please.
Yeah. Make sure
I'll have
Ron's on
conflict.
vacation.
I'll have a conflict in the afternoon.
You have a conflict in the afternoon?
Correct.
Who is that? Who's that?
That was Jeff.
Jeff. Is a 10 o'clock a better time for you, Jeff?
Yes, morning would work.
Let's do it at 10 o'clock on the 4th, January 4th. Thank you so much. In that case, let me go on to item number 14. Can I get a motion to it? Oh, not done. Sorry.
Yes. On the December 16th meeting, can we go ahead and send it out as a 2 to 5 meeting in case there's anything make it, instead of a 2-hour meeting, make it a 3 in case there's any more details that we need to get into and wrap up on any loose ends. We have a December 16th from 2 to 4. Can we just make that instead of 2 to 4, make it a 3-hour meeting just in case? So is that doable with the planning group? I don't want to, Dave. I will get you out. Be my goal to get you out as quick as possible, but I'm just worried about
Who hired this guy?
2 to 5, just in case.
Supporting Ron, it is also under the encouragement of TWDB that we do have a 3-hour meeting. Sure that we get everything we need ready for the technical memo.
All right. Okay.
2 to 5.
3 hours.
Thank you. Can I get a motion?
Can I take
Oh,
30
sorry.
seconds? Literally, we skipped over this page that was a really small text. Ron and I just wanted to point out, these are just recommendations. They are not anything that is going to be tracked, so they are not goals. They do not have to be voted on by the committee to be approved. And they are just recommendations that would be part of kind of the strategies going forward and floodplain management strategies. I just wanted to highlight why we put those in there, because 3A and 3B are kind of connected together, right, as far as recommendations and goals. So if you do have comments, I would hope, I'd hope everybody would read them if they can get out their magnifying glass. We did send them out electronically too.
You did send out electronically.
Yeah, we did send these out. They're in there. I can reformat these and send them again in a larger format if that makes it easier for everybody. But if these are just recommendations that I wanted to point out. These can fit into any standard national flood insurance program floodplain ordinance. So the idea was to make it really easy for any floodplain administrator to be able to incorporate these higher standards into their ordinance. That's the goal behind them. That was all I wanted to connect for everybody. So if you have comments, please let us know.
Certainly appreciate that. Okay. Motion. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Adjourned. Thank you guys online. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Sounds good, Niff. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks,
Very
everyone.
much.